My name is Jacques. I live on the outskirts of a small town, in a house that once seemed spacious and warm, but now stands like a stranger, too big for one person. The walls still remember the voices of my children, my wife's laughter, the smells of dinners, but now all this is just an echo that dissolves into silence. Neighbors rarely visit, and why should they? Everyone has their own life, their own problems, and old people. No one is interested in us. I have always believed that family is the most important thing. I raised my children alone after my wife's death, worked, stayed up all night, saved every penny so that they could have the best. But lately I've caught myself thinking, my children don't come to me, they come to my wallet. My son only calls when he needs a loan. My daughter comes in a hurry, leaves a list of problems on the table, and quickly runs back to her noisy world. My grandchildren? Their laughter is heard less and less often. They are growing up in a different world, where old stories mean nothing and a smartphone is more interesting than their grandfather's gaze. They politely kiss me on the cheek, but their eyes dart away. Sometimes there is a hint of harshness in their words, careless, but hurtful. In the town, I have also become a nobody. In the store, the saleswoman, a girl of about 20, did not even say hello. I handed her a bill, and she threw the change on the counter without looking up. It's a small thing, but it stung. Once, I was standing at a bus stop, trying to ask a young man about the bus schedule, but he just waved his hand without even looking up from his phone. I began to feel like I was disappearing. Like a shadow. People walk by without seeing me, without hearing me. In the mirror, I see an old face with deep wrinkles and tired eyes, but somewhere inside, I remain the same man who once overcame difficulties. But what hurts the most is the indifference of my family. In the evenings, sitting in the kitchen, I remember how we all used to get together. Holidays, weekdays, even arguments were warm because they were alive. Now I hear only silence, sometimes a phone call with a dry, "Dad, could you?" I always could. And I always helped. But every time I feel like I'm losing something. Respect? Meaning? Myself. One gloomy morning, I was walking to the pharmacy. My knees hurt, my heart was failing at times, but I stubbornly held on. A young woman was standing at the entrance to the store, typing something on her phone. I asked cautiously, "Miss, could you help me carry my bag?" She didn't even look up. "I don't have time." And that was it. No apology, no glance. Just words thrown like a stone. I stood there with a bag that weighed as much as the whole world to me and stared at the pharmacy door. A lump formed in my throat. I wasn't asking for much. I was asking to see a person. That day, I returned home with the feeling that something had changed. A quiet, heavy resentment spread inside me. It was no longer just loneliness. It was something else. I didn't know what it was yet, but I guessed. My patience was running out. That evening, I sat in an old armchair by the window. It was getting dark outside, and the town was falling asleep, and I opened a yellowed album. The photos smelled of the past. Someone else was looking out of them, the person I once was. The face of a young man with an open forehead, a defiant gaze, and tireless hands. I was smiling, standing next to a military truck, back in Soviet times, when I was serving in the army. Back then, I felt like I was part of something big, the force that held the country together. I remembered the smell of hot metal, morning wake-up calls to the sergeant's shouts, and the comrades with whom I shared dry rations. I remember how I often had to save the day with a cool head and strong hands. It was there, in the service, that I learned discipline and courage. It was there that I realized that the words, "I can't," did not exist for me. After the army, I returned to my hometown and started from scratch. There were hungry years, old boots, and work that broke my back. But I did not complain. I believed in work as I believed in prayer. Over time, my persistence paid off, first a small team, then my own business. I repaired houses, built new ones, and had a reputation as a master of words and deeds. When I walked down the street, people greeted me first and asked for advice. They knew me, they listened to me. But my greatest pride is my family. My wife, gentle and strong at the same time, was my support. We laughed together, even when we were counting our last pennies, and cried together when we suffered losses. When she died suddenly, my world collapsed. I was left alone with 2 children to raise. And I raised them. I didn't ask for help, I didn't fall to my knees. Those days were difficult, but full of life. In the morning, I took the children to school, worked during the day, and at night I sewed old clothes, repaired shoes, and cooked meals. The children grew up obedient, proud of their father, and I was proud of them. Each of their achievements was my victory. Each of their smiles was a reward. And then there were friends, colleagues, evenings playing chess, conversations about politics, about the future. Back then, my word carried weight. Back then, I knew I was needed. Even in business, I was respected, even my enemies recognized my strength. Sometimes it seemed that the whole city depended on people like me. And now, I sit alone with an album that rustles like autumn leaves. The faces in the photos remain young and smiling, while my hands grow old, thin, and tired. And it hurts that no one asks about my stories. They have forgotten who I was. They have forgotten that this quiet, wrinkled man once carried the whole world on his shoulders. I closed the album and placed it on my lap. My chest ached, not with regret, but with pride that others are trying to forget. I know that what was once my strength has not disappeared. It sleeps inside me. And perhaps it will awaken. Lately, I've started to feel like the world is deliberately pushing me aside. It's as if I'm no longer part of this family, this city, or even this country. I feel like an outdated thing that no one wants to throw away, but no one will ever use again. My children. It's not that they've forgotten about me, but our conversations have become like short instructions. My son calls, speaking quickly, as if giving orders. Dad, I need you to sign some documents. I'll come tomorrow. I tried to say something in response, to remember, to advise, but he has already hung up. He has his own business, his own priorities. He is no longer interested in my opinion. My daughter sometimes consults with her husband about me, but without me. Once I accidentally overheard them talking in the kitchen, thinking I was asleep. Maybe we should sell his house and move Dad closer to us. It's hard for him on his own. Their voices sounded caring, but behind that I heard something else. They were deciding my fate as if they were deciding what to do with an old armchair. As if I wasn't there. As if I had no weight. And my grandchildren. I dreamed of the days when they would run around the yard, listen to my stories, laugh. And now they sit with their phones, looking up from the screen only to say, Grandpa, give me money for the bus. Or even worse, one of them once said, You don't understand anything, you're old. And I didn't answer. Because what? To encourage someone else's indifference? It's not just my family. At the clinic, the doctor listened to me as if I were wasting his time. I started talking about chest pain, and he waved me off. It's your age. Take some pills and that's it. Next. My life, my fears, and my feelings were just another item on his list. I felt like a statistic, not a patient. And then there were the little things that cut like knives. One day, my son forgot to wish me a happy birthday. My daughter came to visit, but she talked more about her work than asked how I was doing. In the store, it was the same indifference again, the change thrown on the counter, words of contempt in line. Old people always slow everything down. Sometimes I sit in the kitchen, look at my hands, and think, is this really me? Is the man who raised a family, built a home, and protected it now useless to anyone? Has my life become nothing but a shadow? Each such incident was like a nail in my dignity. It was as if they were collecting my patience in a box, waiting to break it one day. And I felt that day was coming. That day, everything came together. It was as if everything that had been building up inside me for years had found an outlet. I went into town to buy medicine, nothing out of the ordinary. It was a chilly day, with a wind that cut to the bone, but I persevered. My knees hurt, The bag was heavier than I would have liked, but I felt like I could handle it. At the bus stop, I stood in line at the pharmacy. There weren't many people. I felt out of place. Everyone was in a hurry, each in their own world. When it was finally my turn, I calmly asked for the medicine. The pharmacist, young and stern, didn't even look up at me. She told me the price, which was a little higher than I expected. I tried to ask about a cheaper alternative, but she waved me away. Next, Grandpa. Then, for the first time, I felt something cold roll through me. It was as if I didn't exist. As if I were an obstacle, an unwanted guest. I silently took the medicine, went outside, and saw a young woman with bags at the entrance. The bag was tearing my fingers, and I quietly asked, "Can you help me carry the bag to the bus stop?" She didn't even look up. She said sharply, "I don't have time." And she walked away. She disappeared without even looking back. I stood there with that bag, rooted to the spot. People walked past, looking right through me. I felt so cold that I could feel every wrinkle, every joint. I felt empty. And suddenly, something clicked. It wasn't hurt. It wasn't pain. It was something else, a calm, firm determination. I walked home slowly, but my head was spinning. They no longer see me as a person. To them, I am a burden, a background, useless. But I know who I was. And who I can become. That evening, I sat in the dark in the kitchen, listening to the silence and thinking about my life. I remembered the army, those sleepless nights, those times when I led people. I remembered how, after my wife's death, I held on when others fell. I remembered that I can see weaknesses. I know people, I know how to wait and act. And now, when they've written me off, the man they forgot is waking up inside me. I'm not going to keep quiet anymore, swallow insults, wait for phone calls. I'm going to change the rules of the game. No, I won't shout, slam doors, or demand pity. I will be quiet, smart, and precise. Everyone owes me something, my family, society, those who have forgotten that I am still here. And I will remind them. There was no anger in my chest. There was only clarity. I looked at my hands, old but firm, and felt that they still knew strength. They were still capable of creating. This is no longer about survival. It's about regaining my name. After that scene at the pharmacy, I was no longer the same. It was as if a fog had lifted from my shoulders, rather than pain. I suddenly saw everything clearly. For years I had endured, kept silent, allowed myself to be pushed aside. I believed that this was how it should be, that old age was about silence, modesty, and gratitude for crumbs of attention. But did I ask for much? Didn't I deserve at least respect? That night, I sat down at the table and opened an old notebook that I once used for business notes. The pages had yellowed, but the pencil wrote just as confidently. On the first page I wrote, "My debts. My answers. Not anger, not revenge. I called them lessons. I decided to start with my family. My children were used to me always backing them up, signing documents, giving them money, listening silently. But this time I decided, no automatic. Yes. My son called a few days later. Dad, I need money, I have a problem with my loan. And for the first time in many years I said, no. Let's sit down and talk. Show me everything, and then we'll decide together. There was silence on the line. He wasn't used to this. But I spoke calmly, without anger. I just reminded him that I'm not an ATM, but a father who has a say. My daughter came over with her husband on the weekend and again hinted carefully about the house. I smiled. You want to sell it? Fine. But first, let's talk about what this house means to me. Do you know how many bricks I laid myself? How many nights I didn't sleep so you could have a roof over your heads? Their eyes dropped. They were silent for the first time in a long time. I decided to talk differently with my grandchildren too. When one of them snapped at me. You don't understand anything, you're old. I calmly replied. You're right, the world has changed. But without people like me, This world wouldn't exist. Do you want to argue? Let's sit down, and I'll tell you how to survive when your pockets are empty and you have 2 children on your shoulders. I saw surprise. For the first time, one of them looked at me as more than a shadow. But it wasn't just my family. I decided to start going out in public again. I went to see an old acquaintance, the same one I had once worked with on building a school. We talked about life, about losses, about how time takes away a lot, but leaves the most important things, experience and the ability to keep your word. He advised me to renew my contacts and revive old business connections. You can still do it, Jack, he said. And I felt that it was true. I started walking around the city without hiding my eyes. I looked people straight in the face. Not everyone noticed, but those who remembered greeted me with respect. Even the pharmacist said shyly one day, "Good afternoon." And that was enough for me to understand. The world changes when you change. Every evening I sat down to write in my diary. I didn't write about insults. I wrote about what needed to be changed. I even had plans to help my grandson find himself not with money, but with advice, to remind my children that a father is not just a source of money, and to leave behind a legacy that no one could devalue. It wasn't revenge in the usual sense. It was restoration. Every word I said now had weight because I had stopped being silent. I looked in the mirror and saw not a shadow, but a man who could still act. And you know what? This is just the beginning. When I started writing those pages, I thought it would be just a quiet protest against indifference. But it turned out to be my second youth, not of the body, but of the spirit. Every day I opened that notebook and wrote down not insults, but plans. I suddenly became interested in life. The children were the first to notice the changes. I ceased to be convenient. When they came, I no longer nodded silently. I looked them in the eyes and asked, "What do you want from me? And what are you willing to give in return?" At first they were offended, then nervous, and then they listened. Their voices showed respect that had been missing for years. My grandchildren, at first surprised, now sit down next to me. One asks me to show him how to repair a door. Another is interested in what their grandmother was like. They don't look at me as an old man. They look at me as a person with a history. And society? It doesn't need me. But I no longer need its permission to exist. I don't hide in the store. If the salesperson throws the change on the counter, I calmly say, "Pick it up and hand it to me." I'm not a shadow. And you know what? They listen. Because confidence has power, even if it's 70 or 80 years old. My house doesn't seem empty anymore. It breathes because I am not a guest in it, but the owner. Sometimes I even smile to myself, how little it takes to change everything. Just start respecting yourself. I often think about my wife. If she were here, I would tell her that I feel needed again. Not because the children remembered me, but because I remembered myself. One evening, I was sitting with my grandchildren in the kitchen. They laughed, listened to stories about the army, about the first buildings, about how we ate bread with salt and were happy. And I realized that the most important thing is not to wait for someone to notice you. The most important thing is to declare yourself. Old age should not be a sentence. It is not a time for silence. It is a time for wisdom, which is only valued when you show it yourself. And if anyone thinks that I have broken down, know this, I have only changed. Because strength does not disappear with age. It becomes quiet, sharp, and more precise. I have learned one simple thing: never let the world convince you that you are worthless. Even when everyone has forgotten your name, say it out loud yourself. And the world will hear you.